So, hey, Ali, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to see you.
So, today on Ovis, we're talking with Oli Lipski, sex tech writer and researcher. You work for like Sex Tech Guide, Beducated. You have a really kind of awesome resume. So, to get started, can you tell us how you got into sex tech to begin with?
Yeah, for sure. So let me take you way back when. Um, Back at university, I did my undergrad in history and discovered that I could study the history of anything. And with that, I ended up doing my final project on the history of bisexuality. And it
Mm,
was through the lens of science fiction. So I was always quite interested in this kind of science and sexuality intersection. And from there, I was offered to do a master's at the university in a course called Sexual Dissidence. Um, with that, I got to study a whole range of disciplines, from English literature to law and society, cultural studies, international development, and all through the lens of queer theory. So it was all looking at sex and sexuality and how that plays into the world. One of my projects in my final dissertation actually was on sex robots.
okay.
So I was really interested in um, looking at the potential for sex robots, how people reacted. So I'd be that girl at the party, being like, "Hey, would you sleep with a robot?" And start that kind of conversation. I was always like wanting to push the boundaries and see where people's comfort lay. And yeah, I was super interested in the intersections of sex and tech. And from there, I actually discovered how much I disliked sex robots.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
because at the beginning I was like, wow, these are so fascinating, like quite grotesque, but quite interesting. And by the end of it, I was like, I'm so bored. um, and yeah, it might be a bit controversial to say, but I ended my thesis with the idea that sex tech has so much more potential.
Sure.
And I discovered a community called the Women of Sex Tech.
Yep.
And within that, I just was like, I was like, what else am I going to do with this degree, really? I need to get in. I need to get in on this. So I networked a little bit. I discovered an online platform called The Future of Sex,
Okay.
.net, not .org. So there's two Future of Sexes, and this one was an online publication writing about the future of technology and sex. Um, and from that, I was offered to write for them about an upcoming sex tech hackathon held by Dr. Kate Devlin,
Okay.
who is awesome. And she wrote a book called Science, Sex and Robots, and hosted this hackathon at Goldsmiths. And I went as like a journalist. So it was like my first kind of cool job out of uni after working in a call center for a few months.
That's
um,
really cool. I mean, so we talk about being a journalist in sex tech. I mean, that's quite fascinating in and of itself. But I guess my question would be like, what areas do you specialize? Ooh, language fail. Where do you specialize now? Like, is it still? I mean, you probably have moved away from robots since it's kind of lost its luster. Where do your passions lie when you're writing about sex tech?
yeah, I mean, totally. Like from that experience, like writing about that day, it was like the hackathon. Everyone was writing about. I was writing about all the different projects that were coming out of that, and I feel
Yeah.
like I've kind of gone back to that, and I'm like my passions are super interested in like the potential for technology to enhance sexuality and the sexual experience. Um, so from there, I ended up getting a job at a vibrator company. I was writing on a sex blog, not much around sex and tech. It was more sex and relationships and
Yeah.
lifestyle stuff like that. But since I became freelance about a year and a half ago, I got the opportunity to write for Sex Tech Guide. Excuse me.
Yeah. No worries.
And from there, I just have to have like an eye on the entire industry and see what cool products are coming out. Um, and yeah, my passions mostly lie in like how technology can like benefit intimacy, relationships, um, our relationships with ourselves as well.
Mm.
Excuse me.
No, like yeah, I mean, I think that's super interesting. One of the things that we want to do at Modality also is like looking at, the landscape, and kind of like what's happening. And what I like about how you write is that you really do focus on what's burgeoning, and you try things out and you get in there. And I feel like you're really engaging with the companies. You're really engaging with what the industry is doing. I think that's very spectacular.
Yeah, I just think there's so much potential out there, and like I want to support and shout about it. I want
Yeah.
to tell the world like this is a cool project, support it. Because, yeah, and I feel like we're our values kind of align in that respect, because we do have a keen eye for these kinds of things. And yeah, you just want to support the little guys, because there's so many interesting ideas out there and not enough support or money or attention given to the really cool ideas,
Yeah.
that
I
need.
mean, what are some of the coolest ideas that you're seeing these days?
Well, yeah, I think the apps that are coming out are incredible. I've been supporting lots of yeah, like sexual wellness apps, um, ones that can benefit, yeah, your intimacy with yourself. So you've got audio erotica on these apps. Some of them have like erotic stories on them. Um, Other ones are kind of checking in with like how your sexual health is, making sure that you're getting tested. Stuff that technology is just like the bridge for what we're missing, I think, especially with sexual health not being a priority in society and with the governments and stuff. Um, I think that looking at products that are really important for sensuality, and I know you came to my talk last week on this topic, and it's something that I feel really strongly about, is yeah, toys, devices, apps as well that really can enhance your sensuality and create more mindfulness when you're enjoying pleasure,
Yeah.
and taking
I
that
mean,
pleasure outside of the bedroom as well into your everyday. So there are products that are like sensual jewelry that you can wear and just bring yourself into the present and feel confident in your body and feel confident in your sexuality, your sensuality. Um, yeah, there's more and more stuff that's like coming out that is super like gender inclusive as well and trans positive. And I think that is something that is really needed
yeah,
in
for sure.
society, let alone
For
like the
sure.
industry. Um, so yeah, I'm always like trying to have a keen eye on like intersections like that, on technology, marginalized identities. There's a whole industry coming up. I feel it, that around like disability conscious products
Yes.
in sex tech, and I think that is just like, why haven't we done this? Like, why hasn't this happened before?
It's
Um,
wild, right? Like you would think that like sex is about people and people are different, and you would think that there would be a lot more inclusion in the space, right? Whether it be along gender spectrum, along racial spectrum, or any kind of ability spectrum. And what we're
mm,
seeing is like it's really not the case. But now, like you say, like it's popping up. We have people with like Heather Morrison and Handy,
mm,
people, like Goonies doing VDOM and these other things that are happening where we're seeing a lot more of people's identities being touched in the space. So I think that's really a burgeoning space for sure.
yeah, I've been in contact with, yeah, both those products, and there's apps called Solis as well that are built for like trans and gender non-conforming people, and queer folk as well. They're just about to launch an app, or they've launched on Kickstarter, called Clarity, and it's just about helping people. And I just wish I'd had that, something like that when I was younger, trying to figure out who I am as a like sexual being. um Like those things are so needed when you're struggling with your identity and that in relation to sexuality, intimacy, and just having products that are like really caring and supportive, and brands behind them that are caring and supportive. I think that's really important.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, so when you're writing about these things, do you ever encounter any challenges, or are you kind of preaching to the choir a bit?
That's a good question, actually. I think, um, yeah, I just want to make sure that the product, I give the product like a fair review, if that makes sense, and be quite objective in a way. I think a lot of the time I've encountered issues when I get quite emotionally involved. And I have an incredible editor who is very good at training me, and that's at Sex Tech Guide. And yeah, I couldn't value someone like that more, who just kind of asks me to like take a step back and think, okay, how is someone else going to respond to this? Take yourself out of the equation. There's an element where you need to have like a sense of yourself in there, obviously, with writing, like you are writing as yourself. But yeah, it takes a level of like reflexivity and taking a step back and objectivity, to yeah, write something that when people people read it, they're going to be able to apply it to themselves. So yeah, a lot of the time I write reviews, and there is a section where I can like write about my real personal experience with the product. So I get quite intimate with that. But the rest of the review, it has to be quite, yeah, quite professional in a sense.
Yeah,
So I've had to grow in terms of my writing. Like I've had to write in so many different styles, all within sex and sex tech. Every brand has their own tone of voice, and it's just about placing yourself in that world, in that brand, in that product, and being able to write in a different style every time. Um, yeah, if that makes sense.
no, that's really cool. I mean, yes, it does make sense. But it feels especially tricky given that like it is a personal topic. You know, these are things that we feel like in our lives, in our bedrooms, and especially if you're reviewing something and you know it very much is your experience, right? So I think it's pretty cool that you can, you know, change and morph with what the brand needs, as well as being true to your opinions and your point of view. I think that's really cool. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
totally.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, I mean that like vulnerability, I'm learning more and more is what connects us, and like by putting yourself out there, you're going to be helping someone else. And depending on what I'm writing, like that, I will have to figure out where on the scale how much I'm going to put myself out there. And I think that's something I've really had to learn over the years writing in sex and sex tech. And obviously, yeah, there's power in vulnerability, but there's also, you know, your safety and your own, you've got to have that professional personal balance,
Yeah.
um and just finding that boundary. um,
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky. Like, that's the only word I can think of right now with this whole topic, right? I actually didn't want to come out as myself when I first started thinking
mm,
about modality or thinking about sexuality. It originally started with this idea called consensual roughness, um, which was a blog to give advice from people in kink experience to people who were new to kink. Um, and it was terrifying, right? Because it's like I was working actually in education at the time, and so it's like I had an entirely different life, um, and I felt like by being myself and being vulnerable and being true to the mission of the blog or of the writing, I was
mm,
putting myself at risk in my professional life, right?
mm,
And so sometimes I wonder if I'm writing as myself in modality, even, am I pigeonholing myself into this space? And is that
mm.
okay? Does that cut off opportunities? Like, what does that even mean, right? That I have to think about sex in such a like tight category. I don't know.
Totally. I think that you've just summed it up in terms of like the risk that we put ourselves into by wanting to make the world a better place, and just like,
Yeah.
we're taking one for the team, if like that's one way to put it. Just there is a risk, I think. But I think as long as we within the industry support each other and take ourselves professionally as well, and know that like, yeah, we're changing the way we talk about sex, we're changing the way we think about sex. And if other industries, if you end up wanting to go into another industry that isn't accepting of that, it's a shame. But that's, you've got to figure out where your values are. And yeah, totally on the idea of like keeping yourself safe and keeping your yeah, it's kind of like a reputation thing, right? You're kind of branded with this industry.
Yeah.
But that's this industry is where it's going to start.
Yeah.
Changing the narrative.
I love that. So if you could give, I guess, 3 points of advice to someone looking to start writing about sex tech or sex products or sex wellness more broadly,
Mm.
what tips would you give them?
I would say just start writing. Like, I mean, you said it yourself, you started a blog. I haven't started my own blog, but I am hoping to, just to figure out what I want to write about. Because I've always written for other people. And I feel like I want to have my own voice out there. So yeah, I'm going to be on the same path as whoever's listening. If you're interested, start your own blog. Just start writing whatever you find interesting. Start pitching to people. Don't be afraid to just put yourself out there. I know as a freelancer, I've had to hustle and I've had to just like be vulnerable in that respect and say like, hey, I have this skill, something that I never was that confident a writer. Even at university, I was, I've had to work, like I still have to learn. And with good editors, you do end up learning how to write better. So put yourself out there. And also make sure you say no to things that don't feel right.
Mm.
That's one of the biggest things I've had to learn. Is you can't do everything. Yeah, say no to things that don't feel right or don't feel right at the time. And just know where your values are and know your worth as well. So depending on how much you're going to get back from the experience, just weigh it up and put yourself out of your comfort zone, but also know your boundaries. And I think even just me saying know your boundaries is like, there is so much we can learn from like the kink community and like sexual well-being, and just knowing your boundaries and knowing your limits, and also like putting that into your professional life and putting that into your everyday, and just being like, this is a hard no, or
Yeah.
this is something I can like work with. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's
my.
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
So I recently made my Instagram public. You can follow me on Instagram.
Ooh,
That was like
fancy.
that was a big move. That was like, okay, I'm putting myself out there. My Instagram handle is at Olivlips, and that's OLIVLIPS. And my Twitter, where I mostly share my writing, is at Lipski Oli. So yeah, and I've got a website coming soon, so stay tuned.
Cool. Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes. So if you have to add a website, we can just put it down there as well. Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It was awesome chatting to you. And yeah, thank you so much for hosting these amazing interviews. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cheers.